the Nike Ultrafly. I'm going to be totally honest, I really like this shoe. But, and there is a big but with this shoe, Nike designed, built, and optimized this shoe for a very specific purpose. And that purpose is to race the Western States 100, a 100-mile ultramarathon race in California. And if you're not racing Western States, this is probably not the trail shoe for you. The Nike Ultrafly has been out for a while now, and there have been a lot of videos made about this shoe, and it has caused a bit of a stir. I think within the run YouTube or ShoeTube world, you had sort of three camps that reviewed this shoe. The first being the people who only do road running, only review road running shoes. I think they expected this shoe to be a Vaporfly with lugs. That could not be further from the truth. This shoe has almost nothing to do with the Vaporfly other than its technologies, its materials. The trail community looked at this shoe as sort of, it's too expensive, it's too stiff. Do we really need all of this, technology for trail running? And I would say the opinion was a little bit mixed there. And the ultra community looked at this shoe and they're like, okay, yeah, we get it. But like the trail community in general, they were kind of like, do we really need Superfoams for ultra racing? Is this shoe too stiff? Well, I'm going to say that my experience with this shoe is that I don't know if you need Superfoams for trail running. I'm not racing ultras. I'm running on some very specific types of terrain, which happen to be exactly the type of terrain that the Ultrafly does not do well on. So my experience with this shoe is a little bit not optimal. But all of that being said, I think the Ultrafly is quite an interesting shoe. I think Nike's done a lot of really interesting things with the shoe. It has no new tech in it. It's all standard Nike tech. And in fact, we have a few things we haven't seen in a few years in the shoe, which I kind of missed until I ran in them. But the way Nike mixed them together and the way they optimized it for Western States, I think is really exceptionally done. So if you're not into trail running or the ultra community at all, you probably don't know what Western States is. Well, Western States is the oldest 100-mile foot race, I believe, ever. It goes back into the early 70s. It was a horse race before it became a foot race. And it's run from the Lake Tahoe area about 100 miles west into Auburn, California. Basically, it's running on California fire roads, which are smooth, buffed out dirt, ski area access routes, which are kind of the same, maybe a little gravel in there, flowy single track, California single track, soft, buffed out dirt with some pine needles here and there, generally what they call California carpet. And I think what sets the race apart is it has a lot of climbing. Nothing super steep, just long. We're talking climbs that go on for miles and then descending. Most of the course is descending. So you're descending for, 20, 30 miles at a time. It runs through these fire roads. It goes through what's called the canyons and it goes into sort of the plains of California. And generally it's running over hard, dusty, dry surfaces. There are a couple scrambles, some rocks, a few technical pieces, but they're, over the 100 miles, they're like 1 or 2% of the course. The Ultrafly is designed for this type of running, and this type of running only really exists in California. Yes, you can get styles of, buffed out, dusty fire roads really anywhere in the Western US, but to put 100 miles of it together like that with dusty single track and all that stuff, not everyone has that. Even in Europe, if you're racing in the Alps, something like UTMB Chamonix, this shoe could work and people had made it work, but is it optimal for that? So this shoe is specifically for those buffed out California carpet, dusty fire roads. So since this shoe's been out for a while, there's been a ton of videos about this shoe. Let's just quickly go over the specs and talk about what is actually here. So we have 38 mil of foam in the heel, 29.5 mil of foam in the forefoot, giving you an 8.5 mil drop. It's all ZoomX foam. The upper is Vaporweave, and that's one of the things that made me really interesting about this shoe is because I loved Vaporweave. And we saw Vaporweave in the original Next Percent, the original Vaporfly Next Percent, version 1. We haven't seen it again until this shoe. And it is a material that I actually really like. Additionally, this upper is very simple. There's not a lot of overlays. We have a very minimal toe bumper in this shoe. We do have the swoosh and we have the Nike Trail logo, which are, I believe, either Kevlar or some kind of carbon, overlay, which are cosmetic. But I think they also enforce and reinforce these areas of shoes. The medial sidewall of the shoe is a place that blows out a lot. And the lateral sidewall of the shoe is a place where you're going to get a lot of rock damage. And I think this additional branding and this material helps protect the Vaporweave upper. We've got a minimally padded heel cup, strong heel counter, decent padding back here, a somewhat puffy tongue, it's more puffy than you would expect, and a lace lock system that's very similar to what you find in the Peg 40. I don't think they call it their arch lock system, but it's very similar where you have a band here, you have, a gusset that sort of runs here under the foot, comes back on the other side, and it locks your foot down. Another thing that's been talked a lot about this shoe is that the width of the forefoot is quite wide. Now, I don't find that the case, to be completely honest. I don't find this shoe exceptionally wide, even for a Nike. It is a little bit more generous in the fit, but I think that has to do a lot more with the Vaporweave upper. I think the Vaporweave is very conforming to the foot, and I do think it doesn't stretch, but it gives with the foot as the foot moves in here, which makes this shoe feel much more roomy, especially compared to any other Nike Trail shoe. But what is true about the width of the shoe is the forefoot width, the bottom of the shoe. This is an exceptionally wide shoe, completely exceptionally wide in the forefoot, very wide in the heel, and honestly, it does narrow in the midfoot, but it is still fairly wide in the midfoot. And I'll talk about why I think they did that, but that's where this shoe feels really wide. So when you put this on your foot, you do see the width of the outsole under your foot. So there is a lot of foam that kind of goes out to the sides, which does give you some stability in the shoe. But because it's all ZoomX foam, it sort of works against you as well on certain type of terrain. Now, this shoe does have a carbon fiber plate, but it's very different from any configuration that we've seen in any other Nike super shoe. On the Vaporfly, we have a carbon plate that runs from the heel to the toe. Starts high in the heel, dips in the midfoot, goes right to the ground, comes up in the toe with the toe rocker. In the Ultrafly, starts in the heel, dips in the midfoot, not quite as low as the Vaporfly, and then comes into the toe. On this shoe, the plate actually starts in the midfoot. It starts about here, dips right to the forefoot, and then curves up. But when you look at the bottom of the shoe, you can actually see that there's actually a fork in the forefoot of the shoe, right under the toes. So what that does in this shoe is it actually makes this shoe extremely stiff. This is a very, very stiff shoe. It feels stiffer than the Vaporfly to me. It's just an exceptionally stiff shoe. And lastly, while the plate does not go all the way to the heel, there is a TPU sort of plate in the heel, directly under the heel. There's a little sort of square of a harder TPU material right under the heel, which just gives your heel a little bit of stability, which on those longer downhills, we're talking Western States has downhills that are gradual, but they go on for 10, 20 miles. You're on the heel of the shoe a lot, just absorbing, that terrain, just going down that gradual downhill for a long time. The stability in the heel, I think, actually works really well, gives you a very stable platform for the foot on top of all of this Superfoam. Now, one other thing that's unique about this shoe that we've never seen in another Nike Super shoe is that the ZoomX foam of the midsole is covered by a fabric coating all the way around the shoe. Because if this was completely exposed ZoomX foam, well, it would be a disaster. It would be completely chewed up by, gravel, rocks, anything. This canvas kind of material, I think, adds quite a bit of weight to this shoe, but it protects this foam really well. And another really interesting benefit, I guess, of the material that's coating the ZoomX foam is that if you've ever watched an elite run in a Vaporfly in a world major marathon, and you see them impacting the ground, and you look at that in slow motion, you can see the ZoomX foam just sort of impacts the ground and just sort of squishes out in every direction. In this shoe, because it's coated and contained by this fabric, the feel of landing in the shoe is very much a land sink, and then you get a rebound almost instantly. It feels like the foam sort of goes down and then goes back up. It doesn't go down and then squish out and then go back up. It just goes down and up. It's a little bit more of a rapid feel than the ZoomX that you would find in, say, a Vaporfly. Maybe it's a little bit of a different durometer. I'm not sure, but it definitely does feel different. And I think this fabric coating has a lot to do with that. And lastly, another piece of the tech of the shoe that's been talked about a lot is this outsole. It's got a full Vibram outsole, Megagrip Litebase, probably the best outsole you can get in a trail shoe. It has 2.5 mil lugs. However, as you can see, there is a secondary pattern around these lugs, especially in this area, which is right behind the ball of your forefoot, which is probably about another millimeter and a half, which makes the lugs in this area really about a millimeter. The point is, there's not a lot of grip in this shoe. It's fine for buffed out fire roads, but anything like mud, any sort of technical terrain, northeastern US technical terrain, this shoe just does not have a lot of grip, which kind of makes it ironic that they did put Vibram on this shoe, because you kind of don't need it. Though the Vibram does save the shoe in a few areas on rocky terrain. I'll talk about that when I talk about the ride. But I think Nike put the Vibram on this because Vibram Megagrip Litebase is the best grip rubber in trail running. And this is a premium product. So every one of the competitors, all the other trail super shoes out there, generally, I think they all have Vibram or something comparable to it. And Nike's rubber compounds for their trail shoes have gotten better in 2023, but they're still not at this level. So Nike kind of had to put this on here. But the other benefit of the Vibram on here is that they can put a full outsole, full coverage rubber outsole on here, because Megagrip Litebase is very lightweight, and this will protect all of the ZoomX foam. So there's no exposed foam on this shoe, which I think is quite a smart design on Nike's part for this shoe. So what is it like to run in the Ultrafly? Well, on that smooth, buffed out terrain, the heft of this shoe and the width of this shoe and the amount of rubber that's contacting the ground on that smooth terrain, it feels really nice because this shoe almost floats over that terrain. Now, the trails that I run on here in Taipei are completely the opposite of what this shoe is designed for. I have almost exclusively very steep, very rocky, technical terrain, up and down all of the time. Exactly what this shoe does not like. But I do have a few shorter sections, 20 meters here, 80 meters there, 50 meters there, of terrain that is somewhat resembling a lot of what the Western States course would be, which is dry, dusty, kind of sandy, gritty dirt that can be soft in a few areas and is firm in other areas. And that's, again, where this amount of surface area of this outsole really comes into its own, because it does feel like you're floating across that stuff. And even though there's not a lot of deep lugs on this shoe, which for that type of terrain you wouldn't necessarily need, but on sandier terrain, this surface area does seem to kind of sink in and float on it and then move forward. It's a really nice feeling when you hit the forefoot on the shoe and you're in the right terrain. The problem, though, and this is probably the problem that most people who would be looking for this shoe for trail running are going to run into, because that California carpet, California fire road, again, is not what everyone's running on. And I would say most people that are trail running are probably not running on that. The problem is when you run into rocky terrain or technical terrain in this shoe works against you, because it is so stiff, it doesn't climb well. It's really hard to get up on your toes on really technical terrain, really steep technical terrain, where you have to bound from rock to rock. You have to be very selective about your footing. It's very difficult to do that because the plate in this shoe just wants to keep pulling the heel down. So when you're looking for grip in that technical terrain, the heel's pulling the shoe down and you just never feel sure-footed. Now, when you're descending in that technical terrain, this heel also begins to work against you. This outrigger on this heel just catches on everything. You pull sort of all the rocks down the technical face with you. And then the upper on this shoe, as much as I like Vaporweave and as much as I was happy to see Vaporweave on this shoe, it's not a very good trail upper material. I think it's the best option that Nike had for the Ultrafly of all the upper materials that they have, because the current Nike Trail uppers, that kind of engineered mesh that they have, is just, it's not very good. It's not very comfortable. This is a much more comfortable upper. It's much lighter. It will shed sweat and, water and all that stuff. But the first time I went up a rocky, face, my typical runs, trails and faces I've been up many times in other trail shoes. First time I went up it, I got a rock that kind of rolled down as I was trying to get footing, hit the toe, put a big rip in the Vaporweave. Now, the rip stop of the Vaporweave is stopping it, but still, this was the first rock to hit this shoe. Boom, giant hole right in the toe. Again, that's happened to almost every other trail shoe I brought up that section. Never a problem with a Matrix upper, an engineered mesh Nike upper on their trail shoes. Never a problem. First rock, it's a problem here. So this shoe does feel like it's optimized for racing. This will get you through a 100-mile race. This upper will stay intact, but this is not a training shoe. This is not the kind of shoe you want to use for training. So where the stiffness of this shoe and the outrigger of the heel fight you every step in technical terrain, and we'll come back to technical terrain, if you're going down more gradual descents, like a gradual descent over a long period, like what you'd find on Western states, or you're going up a gradual climb over many miles, then when you're climbing in this super stiff shoe with the plate here, you do have a pocket in here, and this shoe kind of just wants to stay right here. So as you're climbing that gradual hill, this shoe just kind of locks in on the forefoot, feels really good. You really feel the plate at this point, and it's actually quite nice. I can see why Nike made some of these design decisions around the stiffness of the plate, the stiffness of the shoe for those types of conditions. Unfortunately, again, I don't have a lot of that. Now, when you're descending over long gradual stuff, and I did a lot of that on paved surfaces. I do have a lot of gradual descents on paved surfaces, which on the Western States course, you do get a little of that as well. This outrigger heel and the TPU plate that's right under the heel, it's actually really nice because over a long, say, 2-mile descent, that's very gradual, nothing super steep, but gradual, enough that you feel it. It creates a landing zone back here where even if you're a 4-foot striker, as you get tired over a longer run, like an ultra marathon, having this heel to sort of just absorb that and kind of, shuffle down that long descent to save your legs, to save your quads and all that stuff, this shoe just absorbs all that, sinks in there, very stable, very nice, and I can see where this heel is designed the way it is. But back to technical terrain. The other problem beyond the stiffness of this shoe comes down to a Superfoam. And this is where I think the trail community and the ultra communities are both wondering, do they really need Superfoams for the trail? So on technical terrain, if you're going from rock to rock and you're trying to get footing and you have off feel, there's a big problem with this shoe. It has very little ground feel, and it's hard to get any proprioceptive feedback in this shoe, meaning it's hard to know where your foot is in space because there's so much foam. Often when you're in technical terrain, you're trying to land someplace. Immediately you're trying to understand what angle your foot's at, how much is touching the outsole of the shoe so you can understand your grip level. A lot of that comes to feel, ground feel, but also just, what angle the shoe's at. It's really hard to tell in this shoe because everything's so stiff, there's so much material. And the Superfoam fights you every step of the way because it's so compressive. It's so soft. as soon as it hits a rock, the foam just feels like it's kind of squishing or pouring over the foam. So even if your foot is at an extreme angle, generally the foam is sort of absorbing that, so it's really hard for you to understand what angle your foot is at. And this is where running in the shoe in technical terrain can be a little dangerous, because you don't really feel that. You don't get the proprioceptive feedback until you're at extreme angles where the toe collar, the heel collar is kind of butting into your ankle in either direction. And if that's happening, you're at a really extreme angle, and that's like more of an angle than you want. So the Superfoam just being so soft, so compressive, just wanting to absorb around all the rocks, it's hard to understand where your foot's at in space, which is important in trail running, and understand your level of grip, which is also vital in trail running, especially in technical terrain. And then the other problem with the Superfoam in technical terrain is that if you're running a lot in rocky stuff, like I could imagine a rock field that you would see in Colorado or in the Alps in Chamonix, in UTMB Chamonix, where it's just boulders or smaller rocks just strewn, as far as the eye can see. And you're kind of having to pick your way through those rocks. Now, that may not be the most technical because there may be a lot of space in there, but still, you're at kind of off angles all the time. The Superfoam, because again, it's always trying to absorb, and it's just sort of squishing around all those rocks. Your foot is constantly moving side to side and heel to toe. Basically, you're just sinking around all the stuff that you're stepping on with all of the Superfoam, which is very fatiguing. Over a longer run, all those little micro movements that you're using to kind of rebalance the foot, they're going to take their toll on you. So this is also not a shoe if you have a lot of rocky running. It doesn't have to be technical, just rock fields, boulder fields. This shoe is going to fatigue you quicker than a shoe without Superfoams. And I think this is the big conversation right now in trail running, especially on the ultra side of trail running, is do we really need Superfoams? And if there are Superfoams, do they need a carrier foam? Do we need to do something different with the plate? There's a lot of ideas in that space right now. Nike pretty much took what they did in their road shoes, adapted it to something that's specific to Western states, which I think they did a great job on. But still, I think there's a lot of iteration available here. But as far as a shoe purpose-built for the conditions of Western states, I would say they optimized this one exceptionally well, to the point where it doesn't really work anywhere else. I think for the first attempt at creating a super shoe for the trail, really optimized again for Western states, because that's what a lot of the Nike trail athletes are really focused on. That's their marquee race. I think Nike did a really good job with this shoe. I think it's perfect for that use case, but that use case is very narrow. Not everyone has that. Most people aren't running on that stuff, trail running on that stuff. But I think the technologies they put in this shoe, I think the way they implemented them are very interesting. I think this coated ZoomX, and I think the fly plate in here that's midfoot to forefoot and forked in the forefoot, I think is also interesting. And I think we're going to see those make their way into Nike road running shoes. I'm curious about the Streakfly 2 or whatever's going to, if there's something that's going to replace the Streakfly, whatever this prototype we've been seeing in leaked images that I think is a Streakfly 2, it looks like it now does have a carbon fiber plate, but it would make sense for them to use this style plate because the Streak and the Streakfly have always had a midfoot shank. They never had a heel to toe carbon fiber plate. So again, this plate could find its way into other Nike running shoes. And I think that's going to be really cool if it does. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like this type of content, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.